Living in the North has both its advantages and disadvantages. Some of those disadvantages being the weather. A lot of people often say that where they live, that they have the most unpredictable weather around. In my experience, that hasn't been the case at all. Well, not until I had moved to where I currently live, that is. I had moved to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan half a year ago. I had been hard-pressed to relocate for work, and much to my dismay, I agreed. I was forced to choose a new residence in the rural regions between the cities, as the prices for houses were just a tad bit outside my budget, the closer towards the cities we got. The place I found was a quaint farmhouse that seemed placed haphazardly off an interstate. If you've ever gone on a long cross-country drive before, and have spotted houses in the middle of nowhere and have asked yourself, gee, I wonder who lives out there, the answer is me. The house wasn't by any means a hovel, nor was it truly a farmhouse. It just happened to sit on a sizable portion of land. The interior and exterior were definitely dated, but I wasn't looking for a brand new model home. I spent the first month acquiring new furniture and decorating as best I could. That just mostly entailed me putting up various posters of movies and video games I liked. Before I knew it, the house started to feel like my own. After a few months, the weather took a turn. To say I was unprepared for this onslaught of snow would be a massive understatement. I went to bed one evening in early autumn, and when I woke up, I could hardly see outside my own bedroom window. I was greeted by frosted glass and a knee-high layer of white pillowy snow for as far as the eye could see. I could barely believe my eyes, wondering how all this snowfall had happened in a single night. I spent the better part of the morning shoveling out my driveway. The sting of the icy air in my lungs nearly dropped me to my knees as I cursed myself for moving up here. It took me nearly 45 minutes to dig out enough snow to maneuver my car out safely. I arrived at work that day nearly 2 hours late. My boss scolded me for my tardiness, and a coworker whom I had chatted with a few times since moving up here cracked jokes about me being wet from the snow. Upon realizing my unfamiliarity with the cold, my boss became a bit more lenient towards me. He even gave me some helpful advice going forward. I finished work and headed home, having to navigate the dark streets with flurries of white battering my windshield. Somehow, I managed to make it home safely and sprinted inside my house. I made myself some hot food and went to bed rather early that night. Here's the kicker though. The next morning when I woke up, nearly all of the snow had melted. There were just a few small pockets of white, dotting the landscape of dead grass. I was stunned by this, as the thought of that towering mountain of snow I had to shovel through could be gone so swiftly. But lo and behold, when I stepped foot outside to head to work, the morning sun was as warm and invigorating as if it were the first day of spring. I arrived at work on time and spent the morning chatting with my coworker. He seemed to brush off my confusion with an aloof attitude. He said in passing that the weather was always like that around this time, and honestly, that revelation didn't sit well with me. But it was what he said next that stuck with me. He said just wait until it really gets cold out. An almost glazed over look overcame him when he said that, like he was remembering something, but it only lasted momentarily. About a week ago, I was watching the local news and they were telling everyone to prepare for a storm that would be barreling down on the area soon. I did my best to stock up everything I would need to ride it out. My boss even gave me a call to let me know that work would be canceled for a few days. He became sort of quiet on the line, before saying that I need to stay inside. I laughed in agreement, though I could hear a faint bit of trepidation in his voice when he told me that. Still, I thanked him for the advice and hung up. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sounds of howling winds and rattling window panes. It sounded like the shrieks of dying animals, drifting along with the snow outside. I stood up and peeled back a curtain to see a wall of black and white battering at my window. It was unlike anything I had ever witnessed before, and it was far, far worse than that laughable snowfall I had received leading up to this. The next morning, nearly half of my entire house had been submerged by the snow, and the blizzard wasn't letting up. The black backdrop of the lightless sky was now replaced by a cloudy haze. I could hardly see a few inches in front of my window. Thankfully, I had everything I needed to wait out this storm. I made myself some food and spent the day watching TV. Honestly, I was surprised my power was still even holding out. On the second night of the storm, I began to hear something different. It honestly sounded like people screaming in pain, like someone had been injured and was begging for help out in the cold snow. I thought for a moment I heard the words, "Please help us," but again, as quickly as it came, it was gone. I hoped no one had gotten stuck out there, but I figured it was just the bad weather playing tricks on me. The following morning, as I was standing at one of my living room windows sipping my morning coffee, I thought I had spotted something through the blinding snowfall. Shapes moving along the surface of the snow. Shapes cutting out unusual silhouettes on the blurry horizon. As I squinted my eyes to try and see them more clearly, they would just fade from view entirely. I rubbed my eyes, dismissing it all as early morning fatigue and bad weather. Just as I was taking a final sip from my coffee, I looked out one last time, and for a moment, I could have sworn I spotted multiple figures, all standing perfectly still, facing my house, as if I were looking at a crowd of people, and then the entire crowd stopped to face me. I felt a chill drift across my shoulders, and it forced me to turn away from the window momentarily. When I turned back, that sensation and those figures were gone. Then, last night, something truly horrifying happened. I had just finished brushing my teeth and was about to bed down for the night when a sound shunted its way through my small house. It was far louder than the howling wind outside, and I found myself standing rigid next to my bed. Someone was pounding on my front door. I crept through my darkened house and stood a few inches away from my front door. For a moment, I thought I was simply hearing things, but as the thought crossed my mind, another series of knocks pelted at the wood. I walked over to my large living room window and attempted to see who was standing out there. However, between the flurry of snow and the pitch black sky, it was near impossible. I moved back over to my door and called out, asking who was out there. A voice returned, just barely cutting through the wind. It said, "We are," in a low groan. A slight glimpse of movement directed my attention back to the living room window, and that's when I saw them. There were 4 of them all lined up outside my window, staring inside. Their skin was paler than the snow around them, with blue veins running along their cheeks and arms. They weren't wearing any clothing from what I could tell, just smooth white bodies, standing in the snowbank that had formed outside. Their eyes gave off a dull blue glow, which contrasted against the dark backdrop behind them. Despite standing outside, they gave off no indication of being bothered by the weather. They just remained motionless, staring at me. I took a few steps back when suddenly a loud crash followed by a freezing gust of wind hit my face. My front door had been blown open. Snow billowed inside, and when I glanced over at the window, those 4 figures were gone. I stepped towards the door in an effort to close it, but before my foot hit the snow, something in my body screamed for me not to get any closer. I looked out into the torrent of wind and ice. In a flash, a figure appeared in front of me, a towering creature of ivory skin. Its narrow blue eyes were fixed upon me. It raised its hand, and I took note of its long fingers ending in razor-like nails. The tips of its fingers transitioned from ghostly white to a slate black, like it had dipped its fingers into ink. The low groan returned, and a voice emanated from this creature.
"We are many."
As my eyes drifted towards its face, I realized that there was no way for this thing to be speaking to me. It had no mouth, just smooth flesh from its eyes downward. Seeing this, I turned and ran towards the back of my house. I stumbled a few times, slicing my hand open on my coffee table as I used it to catch myself. I lunged into my bathroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. I found my first aid kit and began wrapping my hand as I sat there trembling on the rim of my bathtub. Once my hand was bandaged, I attempted to steady my breath, and then I began to listen. A minute passed. 5 minutes passed. 30. An hour. Before I knew it, it was already well into the morning, and I was still too scared to open my door. The sun began to seep in through my bathroom window, and for the very first time that night, I sighed with relief. I unlocked my bathroom door and slowly pulled it open. I looked around and found an empty, cold house. I stepped outside of my bathroom and immediately lost my footing. I regained my balance and looked down. There were numerous small puddles, all formed outside of my bathroom door, all roughly the size of footprints. There were at least 60 small puddles throughout my living room, leading towards my bathroom. I shut my front door and slumped onto my couch. I was at a loss for words. I had no idea what to think about what had occurred. I had so many questions, but I was far too exhausted to think about it anymore. I turned on my TV to fill the silence, so I could take my mind off what had just occurred. As the news anchors droned on and on, one thing caught my ear just as I was about to drift off. They said that the worst of the storm was still yet to come.